Hello parents, welcome to our first ever online parenting night. So glad that you could join us tonight. And just as always, you know, our heart here at Harvest Vineyard is that we could be equippers of parents and come alongside you as you raise your kids and lead them to know and love Jesus. And tonight I'm so glad that we've got an opportunity to hear from Werstein about how to help our kids to stay active, especially in this season of life where we are under lots of restrictions and staying home a lot. What does that look like? And so Kira's going to have a lot of great tips for us on that. Before we get into that though, I did want to mention that both Kira and I will be live chatting during this video tonight. So if you're watching this live with us, please join in the chat. You can do that by signing into YouTube with your Google account and then join us. I believe it'll be down here in this area of the screen to my lower left, but you'll be able to find it, and you can chat with other participants as we go about mentioning things that you liked or enjoyed as the video goes on and interacting back and forth. And you can also ask both Kira and I questions. Especially great to ask Kira questions for more information on things that she has shared tonight. So please join us in that live chat. And as always, if you would like more info about parenting things, or you have questions, or would just want to connect with me, you can email me at this email. Did it work? I bet it worked. I bet it's right there right now. So just email me at jason.vanhove@harvestvc.org. Okay, without any further ado, let's get started. Here's Kira.
All right, thanks Jason so much for having me today to discuss the topic, how to inspire physical activity in your kids and in a pandemic at that. It can already be very challenging in our modern era to engage our kids in physical activity. And so in a pandemic, when we're really confined and activities are canceled, parks are closed, it can be particularly challenging. So today, I'd like to start with a background, a little bit about myself personally and my expertise as well, just to set the stage for the topic today. So a little bit about me personally. My husband Nathan and I have 3 kids. They are 4, 6, and 7. At this particular timing, this pandemic hit us in a transition time. We're in temporary housing, and it's a pretty small 2-bedroom condo with 5 people, so pretty close quarters. Makes it additionally challenging to get physical activity in. We're a little restricted by that. We're going to be moving into a house in about 4 weeks, so we're kind of busy starting to pack and things like that as well. And I am a professor at Iowa State, so I also teach classes, and now I'm teaching 4 online classes from home. So I've been sorting through, like many of you, how to balance homeschooling now my children with working from home. And so it's been interesting for me to get to apply a lot of the concepts we're going to talk about today in our family's lifestyle. A little bit more about me professionally. My expertise is in exercise psychology. I am a professor in the kinesiology department at Iowa State. And how I got there, if I travel back in time in light of the topic today, as a child, I was very active, like most children actually, and played a lot of sports. Soccer was my primary sport. I went on, played soccer in college, and actually my reason for going to college was to play soccer, and classes were just kind of a thing that I had to do, a hoop to jump through in order to play soccer, and I wanted to go on and play soccer professionally. So I decided to major in sports psychology and exercise physiology in order to learn as much as I could about my performance and how I could enhance that performance. And after graduating, finishing my college career, I was invited to some tryouts and went on to try out for some teams, and much to my dismay, I didn't make any teams. So this was a really painful process for me. I had to do a lot of sorting out of what I was going to do with my life then. And through that process, I found myself having a really difficult time exercising. And this was really puzzling to me because As an athlete, I had been motivated to a fault. And then as I found my athletic career come to an end, it became very difficult for me to exercise. And I couldn't understand that, how to get myself off the couch, to run on a treadmill for 30 minutes a day, to decrease my blood pressure, to prevent disease. I knew that those things were important, but it just seemed so boring to me. And so that inspired me to do a lot of reflecting. And so I decided to go on to grad school to learn more about that, because I knew a lot of people were able to exercise regularly despite not playing a sport. So I went to grad school and majored in exercise psychology. After 10 years of college and a PhD in exercise psychology, I learned how to fuel my exercise motivation tank. And so today I am a regular exerciser, and my mission now, what I'm really passionate about, is helping to translate research in exercise and psychology into practical strategies that help others make exercise and physical activity a regular part of their lifestyle. So with that, next thing I want to take a look at is what the Bible might say about our bodies. And you won't, as I'm sure you're aware, probably find the word exercise in the Bible. It was written 2,000 years ago when our environment was very different. Physical activity was already a very regular part of a person's lifestyle in those times. If we take a look at our modern era, we've taken a lot of that physical activity out of our daily lives, and so it has become very difficult. Let's take a look at 1 Corinthians 6, which says, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, whom is in you, whom you've received from God? You are not your own, for you were bought at a price. Therefore honor God with your body and in your spirit, which are God's." And so one thing we can take away from this is that God doesn't just care about that spiritual component of our lives. He also cares about our physical bodies. And if we take a look at science and what it uncovers about how God designed the human body, we can see that God designed our bodies to move. We function better as human beings, and we really thrive when we're physically active, and that's by His design. So what are the consequences then of physical activity, or inactivity rather, is what I'm going to start with, for children specifically? Many of these are true also for adults, of course. So children who are physically inactive, they're at risk for all kinds of different types of disease: high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, obesity, several different types of cancers, or increasing risk for cancers, poor bone health, osteoporosis. Can also increase risk for depression and anxiety. And one thing, I just wanted to highlight that factor, because in a pandemic, when we're out of our regular routines, when we're not in our support systems that we are a regular part of on a day-to-day basis, a person can be at greater risk for depression and anxiety. So in addition to that, really important in a pandemic is, I want to highlight that physical inactivity can also lead to a poor immune system functioning. So the inverse of all of these, which is children who are physically active, have a lot of benefits. They have increased heart health, stronger cardiovascular functioning, stronger muscles, stronger bones. They also have a decreased risk for all those types of diseases that I've already listed: heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, etc. In addition, children who are physically active also have been shown to do better in school. They get better grades, they have better attendance at school, and they behave better. They're in the classroom, so they're able to stay on task. And likely the mechanism that helps to explain that is that physical activity helps improve their ability to concentrate and their memory when learning. And then lastly, also very important in a pandemic, is that it enhances immune system functioning as well. So if we want all of these benefits for our children, we've seen that it's important. It's important to God that we take care of this gift of the body that He gave us. How much physical activity do our children need to do in order to achieve all these benefits? The physical activity guidelines for youth include that it's beneficial for our children to get at least, so this is the minimum, at least 60 minutes per day of moderate to vigorous physical activity, and at least 3 of those days of the week, we want to make sure that we're also doing muscle strengthening activity. So it doesn't mean necessarily that we would take our children into the weight room and have them lift weights, but they can do all kinds of activities where they're moving their body and they're gaining strength in that way. So if they are able to play on a play set that you have in the backyard, or and move their bodies, climb a tree, those things do strengthen their skeletal muscle as well. And then, in addition, 3 of those days of the week, it's also important that they are doing some type of activity within that 60 minutes that will strengthen their bones. And what that means is that we need to make sure that they are doing weight-bearing activity as well. So non-weight-bearing activities, some examples would include swimming and riding a bike. While those are important in terms of improving cardiovascular health, they don't strengthen bones in the same way. So we want to make sure that in addition to doing those non-weight-bearing activities, that they're also doing weight-bearing activity like running or playing a sport, playing on a playground, dancing, etc. A couple other things I want to highlight with the physical activity guidelines is the difference between, you might hear me say exercise or physical activity. They aren't actually the same thing. Now, they do provide the same health-related benefits, so they're both great. What's the difference? Physical activity is any bodily activity that raises our metabolic rate, our resting metabolic rate, above that resting threshold. So it could be vacuuming. Hopefully your children do some vacuuming. Mine don't so much. It could be blowing bubbles. It could be skipping. So any bodily movement, it doesn't have to be this consistent and continuous. We don't have to put our children on a treadmill. And then the last thing that I want to highlight with the physical activity guidelines is that 60-minute guideline for children doesn't have to be done all in one bout. So it could be 1 minute, take a break, another 5 minutes of dancing or free play, take a break, and then maybe 20 minutes in the afternoon, and then riding their bike again in the evening. So it's cumulative physical activity throughout the day. What research has shown is that every minute counts. Next thing we'll consider is how active are our youth? What does research show? And research has shown a trend in recent years that kids are becoming more and more inactive, sadly. And so we're starting to see more and more of those negative consequences of physical inactivity. So specifically, less than a quarter of children that are age 6 to 17 years participate in that 60 minutes that's recommended of physical activity per day. In addition, only 26% of high school students participated in that minimum of 60 minutes per day on every day of the week. Only half of high school students attended PE in an average week, and only 29% of those high school students attended PE every day. So what we can take away from this is that that physical activity and exercise for our children isn't something that we can exclusively rely on the schools, and that it's also important for us as parents to help to make sure that our children are engaging in physical activity. So with that, we know how important it is, those benefits we want for our children. We know it's important to God that we take care of our bodies. We know how active they should be. So what is a parent to do? I'm going to start with, before we get started with those specifics, you can lead a horse to water. Maybe you know this expression, but you can't make it drink. So this is the same. This saying is also true for our children, or for other people for that matter. We can't force or make other people exercise or be physically active. So the first step for us as parents is to recognize that we really can't force our children, especially to like the activities that we like. And the more we really try to control that, oftentimes they're going to dig their heels in and resist it even more. So instead of approaching in a controlling way, what's important is that we approach this topic with our children in a way as to how are we going to design the environment and support and inspire them to be physically active, and really to help grow the motivation that's already within them, because children start off really enjoying physical activity, and it's not until, just like most of us probably did, like myself, it's not until they go through adolescence and into adulthood that adults really teach this out of children. We're going to go into more details about all of that. So we're going to talk about practical steps, things that we can do as parents, and then also some things that we want to try and avoid, some things that can hurt a child's motivation to exercise and be physically active. The first thing that we need to consider, we want to take a look at, is as a parent or as a person individually, what is our exercise paradigm? We may need to take a step back and reframe how we view exercise personally. Because just like with whether it's our faith or our views on any different topic, the views that a parent holds influences the views and the learning of the child on that particular topic. So many adults, not all adults, thankfully, many adults experience and feel that exercise is something that is not enjoyable. They really don't like to do it. It's this necessary evil, a chore that they have to do to achieve a desired outcome. You'll often hear people say things like, I hate running. Running's a punishment. I don't run unless I'm being chased. Ha ha ha. Right? So they're joking, but not really. So a part of the reason why they feel that way about exercise being a punishment is because it was used on them as a punishment, maybe as a child or through sport. And what I'd like to do now is take a minute to pause. You can turn to the person sitting next to you, or if you're by yourself, maybe pull out a piece of paper and do some writing and reflecting. We'll just take a minute to think through maybe how exercise has been experienced by you throughout your childhood and your adolescence. Did you ever experience it as a punishment? What's your current exercise paradigm? So we'll just take a minute to reflect on that. And so what we'll do next is travel back in time a little bit to really understand why it is that we have this current cultural paradigm about exercise and physical activity being something that's a punishment. So it was about 200 years ago when physical activity and that manual labor developed an even more a negative reputation. So there was in prisons a person who thought that it was somewhat wasteful for prisoners to kind of be idling the time away. And so they thought up a way for them to be more productive. There's the person is named William Cubitt, and he invented, got the picture on the screen here, of the very first treadmill. And so he had prisoners hop on that treadmill and continue to walk, and what they were doing is literally grinding flour on the treadmill. So that's where it got its name. And in addition to these prisoners being forced to do this manual labor as a part of their punishment and in prison, additionally, they were often flogged or beaten while they were working on these treadmills. They were forced to continue to run to exhaustion. And what's particularly interesting with this picture is that it looks very much like our modern day gyms. And so this association between treadmills and running and physical labor, and the association with it being a punishment, has been perpetuated throughout time. And PE teachers and coaches sometimes have been known to use that physical activity for management of behavior and as a punishment. So, late for class, run a lap. Late for practice, run a lap. Talking out of turn, okay, so I happen to do that quite a bit as a child, and so as a result I had to do a lot of push-ups or sit-ups for that. And so it's not that, of course, coaches and PE teachers are these bad people. They're continuing a practice that they learned as children, and so it still has consequences on the perception of physical activity and exercise upon children who are being raised with those practices. So the inverse of that, one thing that I want to highlight is how can we then write a new narrative, a new exercise paradigm for this next generation of children, for our children and for our family. I want to give an example of an individual that I had the opportunity to meet and coach when I was working at an acceleration program through grad school. His name's Jim Itis, and he signed up for an acceleration program that was typically for youth athletes, and so he was not the typical athlete we had coming through the program. Nonetheless, it was a very rigorous program, so they would do sprints and on treadmills, resisted sprints, hill sprints, all kinds of different exercises, and it was very physically demanding. So a lot of times you would hear the athletes say things like, "Oh, this is killing me." Okay, maybe you've said that or heard other people say things very much like that. Jim would hop on the treadmill as he's sprinting and yell at the top of his lungs, "It's making me live!" So very inspiring to watch and to see a very unique perspective. But what's I find particularly interesting about that perspective is that it's actually scientifically accurate. This is how God designed our bodies. It's called the principle of overload. It's what we have named it as humans. So when we stress our bodies, and exercise is a stressor, it's a good stressor, our bodies adapt to that stressor. They become stronger. If we stress the cardiovascular system with aerobic exercise, we enhance our cardiovascular fitness. If we do muscle strengthening exercises and fatigue our skeletal muscle, they become stronger and adapt to that stimulus. So what we can do as parents, especially with our children from a very young age, is to teach a more accurate paradigm and positive paradigm about exercise and what physical activity does for our bodies. So your child might be running around in your yard, or maybe you're doing some races, or they're riding their bike, whatever it may be. And you can just stop them in that moment, put your hand on their heart as their little heart is beating harder, and say, "Wow, you're working really hard, feel your heart," and have them put their hand on their chest and feel their heart beating harder. And then explain to them that that's your heart working hard, it's getting stronger. You are getting very fit. You might also explain to them the different physiologic cues and what's going on and happening in their body as they're riding their bike up a really steep hill, and their legs start to feel fatigued. A lot of times, sometimes people say, oh, my legs are burning. Well, I mean, they're not actually burning. We don't have a word for this, but they're feeling tired. That's what's happening. So we can help explain to our children, that's your legs getting stronger. That's what it feels like when your muscles are being overloaded and they're getting stronger. So translating those and identifying those physiologic cues of exertion as something that's positive helps to write a narrative for our children that exercise and physical activity is something that's positive, something that we can enjoy, and it's by design. I want to highlight a verse from the Bible that I've spent a lot of time thinking about from Ecclesiastes 5, an observation that says, this is what I have observed to be good, that it's appropriate for a person to eat, drink, and find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life that God has given them, for this is their lot. So what I want to highlight here is to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun. Toilsome labor, in the times that the Bible was written, they're not talking about laboring in a cubicle with an Excel spreadsheet. This toilsome labor is physical. Maybe they were, they're working in the field and doing some farming, or maybe they're washing their clothes in a wash basin or in a river. So this toilsome labor, what has been observed here is that we can enjoy it and we can find satisfaction in that. Next thing we'll do is take a look at a model of motivation. The reason we're doing that is because, once again, we'll take some steps back. We're trying to increase motivation in our children, inspire a physically active lifestyle. And so how then, as parents, can we influence their motivation? They've already got that motivation within them, and what we need to do is set up an environment and interact and engage with them in a way that's going to help support that motivation. This motivation model is called the self-determination theory. And sometimes when we talk about or discuss theories, sometimes people have a little bit of a resistance towards it. They think it's maybe just a theory is something that some guy thought up, and it's equivalent to, like, I have a theory about who stole the cookie from the cookie jar. Well, this is actually a scientific theory. So scientific theories are based on empirically derived data. So that's a fancy way of saying it's evidence that's been found about how the world works and how things interact together. And as a person of faith, I find it particularly interesting to me because I feel that science is helping to uncover how God designed human beings and how we function, how we operate. And so this theory is called the self-determination theory. And what the title is implying is the extent to which a behavior is determined by the self. If it's self-determined activity, we're going to be more motivated to do it. If it's less self-determined, if it's determined by something externally, if the reason that we're doing it is something external like guilt imposed from a parent, or maybe our doctor is giving us a lecture that we need to be physically active or we're going to have to be on medications. So if those are the reasons that we're physically active, it's less self-determined and we're going to be less motivated to engage in that behavior long term. Because what we're going for here is a lifestyle. So sustained behavior change and not just physical activity that's short-termed. So we want that lifestyle for our children. We're going to go through each of the components that help determine that intrinsic motivation. Competence, which is the extent to which a person believes that they can do a behavior. So, do I believe that I can ride my bike? Would I be successful at that? Autonomy, that sense of control. Is it determined by me? Am I doing it because I want to? And then the third component, relatedness. If we can support physical activity in our family environment, that this is something that's normal and we have a sense of belonging when we engage in physical activity together as a family. Again, this is more intrinsically motivated. And that intrinsic motivation is what sustains long-term a lifestyle of physical activity. I'm going to contrast in a few minutes the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation as well. So with that, I want to, again, take a few steps back and consider, I was giving some different reasons for why a person or a child might be physically active, or they might enjoy playing, or they might feel that they have to do a particular activity or engage in a sport because they're being forced to. And so what I want to highlight with that is that these reasons for exercise, whether we're a child or really both for adults as well, are very powerful in fueling our motivation to continue this long term. So I want to tell a story that helps to explain the effects of these different exercise reasons, to help us really solidify why the reason that underlies the behavior is really important. There was once an older man who was a psychologist and who understood behavior and how he could influence the behaviors of other people. He had some children playing baseball in the lot next door to him, and he didn't really want them there. They were hitting the ball in his yard, they were walking on his flowers, and he didn't want a window broken. So instead of just telling them to leave, he went over. The kids had set up playing for the day because they like baseball, and he went over with a nickel and handed a nickel to each child and said, "This is a nickel for playing baseball. I am an older man, and you know what? I've decided I like having young people around. It makes me feel young. So I want to pay each of you a nickel for playing baseball." The next day, he went back and did the same thing. "Here's a dime for each of you for playing baseball." He went back with a quarter, $1. He kept increasing the stakes until a couple weeks later, he went over. They'd set up to play baseball and didn't bring any money this time. And they said, "So, aren't you going to pay us?" And he said, "Oh, I wish I could, but I'm on a fixed income and this is getting really expensive for me, so I'm not going to pay you anymore." And so what did the children do? They packed up their bat and ball and they went home. What happened over the course of those few weeks was that they started playing baseball because it was enjoyable. And over the course of those weeks, the older man was able to influence their motive and their reason for playing baseball. And it became money. It became something that's external. And then the concern here with having a reason such as something that's external, when that external reward is taken away, there's not a reason to continue playing. So we want to be very careful about the rewards and the reasons, the rationale that we have for being physically active. So with that, we're going to take a look at this motivation model. As you can see, people who are most motivated at the top have intrinsic motivation. So the reason that they exercise is because they enjoy exercise in and of itself. They find pleasure in it and satisfaction in it. People do exercise for external reasons. They're typically not as regular about their exercise regimen. They likely don't enjoy it as much. And the reason for that is because their reasons are external. So some examples that you can see on the slide are that it may be that they're exercising for a sense of obligation, so they feel guilty. Maybe their parent is forcing them. If it's an adult, it could be that their spouse is nagging them, and then they have this sense of obligation or guilt. It could be that they are trying to achieve an external reward, like or a tangible reward rather, like to win a trophy, or they're trying to avoid a punishment. Oh, I know if I don't exercise or if I don't go to practice at this time, I'm going to have this punishment over here. So they are engaging in exercise or physical activity not because they enjoy it as the end, but it's the means to an end. Whereas if it's intrinsically motivating, exercise is the end itself. It's enjoyable. Now, I certainly don't want to suggest that ever having any external reasons for exercising is bad or something that we should be ashamed of. Certainly not. But what I am suggesting is that we want to tap into that intrinsic motivation at least some of the time. We want to find exercise as something that's enjoyable because that's what's going to sustain our long-term motivation. So even for me, as an example, someone who understands motivation, sometimes I am finding myself, my alarm goes off in the morning, I exercise in the morning, and I'm really tired and I'm having a hard time getting out of bed. And I might even use some of these external forms of motivation as well. So this sense of obligation. Oh, you are an exercise psychologist. You need to get out of bed immediately and exercise. So that's using a sense of that obligation or even guilt to try to motivate my behavior to get out of bed. Now, what happens for me is once I get out of bed and get started, and certainly when I get to the gym, I really enjoy the class. I take a class at a gym and I enjoy the people there. It's really fun. But sometimes myself, I'm feeling tired as well, and it can be hard to get started. So we're going for that intrinsic motivation, finding it intrinsically motivating most of the time or whenever we can. And with that, what I want to highlight, that takeaway from that motivation model, is that long-term motivation is sustained by intrinsic motivation. So anything less than that intrinsic motivation, it can be like spray paint on a rusty car. Eventually it flakes off. If that external reward is taken away, then we don't have a reason to continue engaging in exercise. It's just not as strong when we don't see exercise as something that in and of itself, it is enjoyable. So what we want to be particularly careful of with our children is communicating to them an external reason for motivation. And one that's so often communicated to our children is that exercise, the primary reason for it is for body weight regulation, weight loss, and body weight regulation. So the concern and the problem with that is that it can lead to dropout very quickly in an external motivator. So we want to focus less on seeing exercise as the means to the end, that being weight loss and body weight regulation, and focus more on exercise as the end, something that we can enjoy in and of itself. Another thing that can help with that is considering the motivational climate that we create as a parent in our home. So 2 different types of climates that I'm going to highlight next. The first is called a task goal orientation versus an ego goal orientation. Now, it can be okay to be motivated by both types, but having an ego goal orientation alone can be particularly harmful to motivation. So let me tell you a little bit more about each of them. The task goal orientation is a person that feels successful when they have done their best, when they improve, when they work as hard as they can. And so we can set up an environment like this for our children when we praise them and get excited for them, commend them when they have done their best and when they see improvement. The other end of the spectrum is an ego goal orientation. This is when people feel successful when they win, when they're the best, when they've scored the most points, they've done better than other people. So this is norm referenced. The problem with being exclusively ego oriented is that if a person is not the best, then it often leads to dropout very quickly. Then they don't want to participate. They know that they can't win, so why try? I'm just going to fail. So it is okay to be ego oriented from a motivational perspective when we are also task-oriented. So if a child or a person might feel okay with losing, they maybe don't like losing, but they're okay when they've done the best they can, they still have a task orientation. They've done the best they can, they improved compared to a self-referenced criteria, so compared to their last score. They've seen some improvement. So how we can set this up in our home. Got an example of one of my kiddos, which he reminds me actually a lot of myself as a child, and he's very competitive. He, even to the extent, we could be just sitting at breakfast and he might say, all right, first one to raise their hand wins. And so he is just ready for competition at all times and really loves to win. And so we're working on setting up this task-involved climate where he also feels successful when he does his best and sees that as successful as well. So one thing we see him struggling with is if we play a family soccer game together or do some bike races, and if he sees that he's not about to win, then he'll quit and then he'll go and find a corner to go off and cry in. So the one way that we've worked through that with him is I pulled up a YouTube video of Michael Jordan and explained to him who Michael Jordan is. He's one of the best, if not one of the greatest basketball players of all time. And there is a video of him with missing slam dunks. So we're watching and he's laughing. Oh, watch, he's greatest basketball. He just missed a shot. And oh, look at that. Oh, how funny. He missed another one and another one. And I read a quote from Michael Jordan, which is, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that's why I succeed. And so very clearly, Michael Jordan is both task and ego goal-oriented. Yes, he wants to win, but also he feels successful when he does his very best. You just get back up and you try again when you lose. So communicating that is really important. And what we can also, we want to be cautious in our home is that we're not pitting our children up against each other and creating a competition between them. So, okay, well, who can get their PJs on first? Or who can do the most jumping jacks here? But when we're highlighting when they have improved relative to their own. And it's okay, it is okay to keep track of score. It is okay to play games with children. So I'm not suggesting that. But again, what I'm highlighting is that it's not winning is the only definition of success, but also a task-involved definition wherein when we do our best and improve, we are also very successful. I want to take a look back at that motivation model once again, and on the far right-hand side is a continuum of control, wherein at the top, a person is most self-determined. We have that self-determination is high. So a person is going to be most highly motivated. They have the highest level of intrinsic motivation when it is determined by themselves. So they are riding their bike because they want to, as opposed to lower levels of self-determination. It's determined because, oh, I'm being forced to do this or manipulated in some way. So what can we do as parents to make sure that we are not harming that sense of autonomy towards exercise and physical activity? One thing that we want to make sure of is that we do provide some choices for our children. So maybe it's the activity that they're going to do. We're limited by time and resources. Children can't, in most families, do every single activity that they'd like, but you might be able to provide them with some choices. So this season in our home, everybody can do one sport or one activity, and so you might say, well, you have a choice. Do you want to do soccer or baseball? And so giving choices whenever possible helps to fuel that sense of autonomy. The next thing we want to consider is what kind of carrot might we be dangling as a parent? And in what ways do we reward, and what things do we use as punishments? So I won't get all into a lot of the details on punishing, rewarding children, but I do want to take a step back and have us consider what kinds of things that we do use as rewards. So whatever we use as a reward, we're communicating to our children that this is what you should like. This is the most important thing. And they're going to associate that with positive feelings because they get that thing as a reward. So it would make sense then that we might use physical activity as some kind of reward. Maybe, hey, you worked so hard on that today. Thanks for doing such a good job. Let's go celebrate and go on a family bike ride. So it can be used as a reward. The next thing we want to consider, the other end of the spectrum, is if we use punishments in our parenting, what kinds of things do we use as punishment? We've already talked about avoiding using exercise as a punishment. So we would want to avoid things like, oh, you're making a mess in here. This is terrible. Go outside and play. Right? It communicates, you've been bad, therefore you need to go outside, and that's your punishment. So we can't, sometimes that is what our children need. They do need to get some energy out and to move their bodies. However, how we have that conversation influences how they interpret what exercise is. So we might sit down and say, hey, it looks like you've got a lot of energy to get out of your body. So let's head outside in the backyard and play on the swing set for a little bit. Additionally, we want to consider other types of punishments or rewards that we might use. If it's often, a lot of times screen time can be used, and it is a sedentary activity. Whatever we use as a reward, we just want to remember that it's going to make our children want it more. The next factor in that motivation model, relatedness. When we can create in our home, in our family, a sense of that physical activity and exercise is something that's normal here, and this is just a regular part of our lifestyle, and we model that for our children, and then we do physical activities and we exercise in different ways with our children. They have a sense of belonging towards physical activity. They can also have that if we sign them up for different types of sports or physical activities. They can have that with the other children that they're on a team with. I want to highlight once again modeling and being an example of living a physically active lifestyle. Part of that, again, is reflecting on our exercise paradigm. Another component of that is that you might be wondering is, okay, well, how active do I need to be? What are the guidelines for me as an adult? The physical activity guidelines for adults are currently significantly less than children, actually. So for adults, it's recommended to get 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week. So that's about 30 minutes a day. And in addition to that we also be doing resistance training, and so muscle strengthening activities at least 2 days of the week. We want to target major muscle groups in about 8 to 10 exercises. So that might be something that we can reflect on as adults as well. The next factor in that motivation model is competence. When we can grow a sense of competence in our children, that they are capable of doing that activity, that it's something that they're improving on, they're good at it, it increases their motivation to do it. If we think about, well, what types of activities do I like to do in my free time? Most people don't say, I really like to do things I'm not good at. So that'd be pretty unusual. So growing that sense of competence helps make it more intrinsically motivating. We feel good about doing that activity then, that sense of achievement. So how we can do that as parents is we can set our children up for success. So we want to make sure that we're choosing activities for our children that are realistic and achievable for them. My oldest daughter had watched me run a few 5Ks, and she really wanted to do one. And so she was 5 at the time and just kept asking me over and over, and I really wanted to do it with her. I thought that was something that would be really fun. Unfortunately, this is a story of a parenting fail. So I did then sign her up for a 5K. We ran it together. The first half mile went well, and then as everyone passed us, we lost sight of the rest of the group, and it was hard to find our way back. We were so far behind. So 3.1 miles might be a little bit far for a 5-year-old, and so I didn't set her up for success and for a positive experience in that situation. So instead, what we've done since then is signed our kids up for different track and field races that are quite a bit shorter, so something that's more realistic where she's going to have a quite a bit more positive experience. Once we set our kids up in those situations where we're going to hopefully be building their competence and their belief in their ability to do something, we can increase the challenge for them, and then they're going to have that opportunity for success to improve. We want to make sure that we're building that gradually as well. Next thing I want to highlight is a way of building that competence is speaking encouragement and avoiding criticism. This might seem pretty simple at face value, but it can be a little more complex than we might think. So again, another example. So since I'm quite aware that encouragement is really important, giving praise, I'm watching my kids' soccer games, and I'm at my daughter's soccer game. She scores a goal, and this mom does a lot of cheering. Sadly, I found out later from my daughter that that's actually not something that she particularly enjoys. And so she actually said to me, "Hey, Mom, can you quit cheering for me so loudly? It makes me not want to play soccer." Which made my heart very sad to hear that. And so we want to make sure that we're continuously keeping an open dialogue with our children, and that we're aware of things that are actually rewarding to them. So she actually prefers that encouragement privately in a side conversation and feels really good about that. And when we give that encouragement, what should it sound like? It's going to be most effective when we can be specific about what they've done well. So instead of, or in addition to these broad general, "Good job, that was so good," and those things are nice to say, we can enhance competence even further when we're specific about what was done, what specifically was done well. So when we say, "What a great pass. Wow, you were able to go over that jump on your bike. That takes a lot of coordination. That's really cool." So when we're being specific about what was done well, is really important. And then the last thing as far as building competence goes is also making sure that we're avoiding criticism. So this might seem a little bit more tricky than we might think if we're trying to teach our child a new skill. Maybe that we're trying to teach them to play baseball. We're gonna bat, and so they continue to miss the ball. So instead of criticizing and telling them, "Oh, nope, you didn't look at the ball that time, you didn't look at the ball." So telling them what to do is a way to give them information without it coming across as critical. So it might be, "Keep that eye on the ball, keep that eye on the ball." So again, we're avoiding telling them what not to do, and instead telling them what to do in order to learn that new skill. Next, let's take a look at and consider the built environment. So physically, what does our home look like on the inside and the outside? We consider these visual cues and then toys that we might be giving our children as well. These things influence how physically active that they're going to be. So for example, maybe they wake up in the morning, they come downstairs, first thing they see is the TV with the remote. There's a visual cue right there. They turn on the TV, and now immediately they're seated and they're not engaging in any kind of movement or activity. So a visual cue that we might have set out, if it's a younger child, some toys they can be moving and building blocks with, as an example. So considering what types of toys we have available for our children is also a part of the physical environment that influences how much activity that they're going to be likely to engage in. So given lots of different ways and examples, approaches to increase that physical activity in our children, in our current environment where we are quite a bit more confined to our homes, parks are closed, what are specific examples, activities that we could do with our children that are likely intrinsically motivating to them, things that they would want to do. So I just want to provide a few examples. It might be something as easy as blowing bubbles with a young child. It could be, if it's an older child, it could be going on a walk. The conservation centers are still open in Ames, McFarland Park. It could be Peterson Park as well. It could be playing with sidewalk chalk. You might draw hopscotch on the sidewalk or the driveway, and you could draw different types of maybe an obstacle course, set some cones out. You're going to hop over those cones. You might side shuffle, run backwards, skip, all kinds of different movements that can be done. And then another example, very popular at the Werstein house, are dance parties. So it might be you play music off your phone and you're outside and you dance. It might be inside your home and you have a family dance party. So all different ways. You might make obstacle courses in your home, move your couch cushions, whatever kind of thing that you're comfortable with. Can be creative in lots of ways. Recently, my children, we're getting creative. This was our PE homeschooling. They decided to set up a sledding run down the staircase. So we'll take a look at that.
2, 1, Griffin, ready? Okay.
We did find that a crib mattress works optimally for this type of sledding environment. You got to put probably some pillows on the wall, pillows and blankets to cushion you at the bottom of the staircase as well. And then if it's not quite fast enough, doesn't provide enough challenge, if you notice my son in the video, he was acting as a jump for the sled. So lots of different ways that we can be creative. So lastly, I just want to finish by summarizing and highlighting some of those takeaways, practical strategies that we can do as parents, and then again, some of those things that we want to avoid. So we're going to take a step back and we can evaluate and reflect on our own personal exercise paradigm. If it's the exercise, this is killing me, it's this awful, dreadful thing, this chore that we have to do to achieve a desired outcome, or does exercise make us live, and is it something that we can enjoy doing as a family? We can also help our children to grow and write that narrative where exercise is something that's positive, when we help them to identify those physiologic exertion, those cues, whether it's increased heart rate, increased respiratory rate, muscle fatigue, maybe they're sweating, and identifying those cues as an adaptation. This is a positive thing. Your body is getting stronger. We can set up different rewards and fun ways that our family can engage in physical activity together, build that sense of relatedness, sense of belonging, that it's normal for our family to be physically active and exercise together. We can also model exercise for our children by making that a personal part of our own lifestyle. We can build their competence by speaking encouragement and being specific about that praise, those things that they do really well. And then the inverse, things that we want to try and avoid, is making sure that we're not using too many of those external reasons for exercise. So, you better ride your bike, or you're going to be unhealthy, or tying it too closely with the body weight regulation. So again, it's that exercise can be something that's enjoyable. It can be the end instead of the means to an end. And lastly, I just want to wrap up this evening with a prayer. So if you join me. Dear God, thank you for these parents and families. We all thank you for this gift of our bodies. Be with us as we move and exercise and enjoy these gifts that you've given us as a spiritual act of worship. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks so much for being here with me in this virtual event.